Great. So,
Okay, ma'am.
so today we are going to talk about approach to hemoglobinopathies. I was supposed to talk about thalassemia and sickle cell disease, but once I made a slides of thalassemia, I thought it would be injustice to sickle cell to talk with thalassemia. So maybe we can take later some other day about the sickle cell disease. I'm mainly going to talk about the thalassemia diseases. So once we need to know about the thalassemia, when we talking about thalassemia or hemoglobinopathy disorders, it is very important to understand the epidemiology, which are the cultural or which are the societies which are affected by these disorders, and how to make the diagnosis, what are the relevant investigations, what is the clinical picture of this disorder, and how to manage them, complications associated, and brief role about the bone marrow transplant, which is a curative therapy for this. So from where the word thalassemia comes, it came from the Greek word derived from the thalassa, which is mean sea, and emia means which blood. So this was the belt around the Mediterranean Sea, where they found this kind of a peculiar disorder found in the natives of this region, and hence the word thalassemia was given. So in India, this is one of the commonest single gene disorder in Indian population. And 10% of the total world thalassemics are born in India every year. With approximately 27 million births per year, the annual birth of 32,400 babies happen in India, which is a huge number. So every year we are adding around 30 to 40 patients, babies with thalasssemic disorder in our population. And there is around estimated rate of around 3.79% carrier frequency in beta thalassemia in India. And the WHO update on beta thalassemia indicates a similar overall frequency rate of 3 to 7%. And given the current nationwide population, it is estimated that around 35 to 47 million carriers are present in India. And certain communities in India, such as Sindhis, Punjabis from northern India, Bhanushalis, Lohanas from Gujarat, then Neo Buddhist, Kolis and Agris from Maharashtra, and Goras from Karnataka, they have a very high carrier rate. So what do you mean by carrier rate? So minor, trait, and carrier, they are all similar terms which are used in different connotations and different literature or this thing. But anybody who's thalassemia minor is having a thalassemia trait, and anybody who's having a thalassemia trait is actually a thalassemia carrier as well. So these are all heterozygous patients. So if anybody can tell us what is the common between these all these people. So these are all thalassemia minor people. So one is that it is very important to know your status, whether you are thalassemic minor or not. And knowing your status does not hamper your activities. You can excel in any of the field in which you are in without having any problem with your thalassemic minor status. So this is the thalassemia carrier rate depending upon the state. And in Mumbai, the rate is around 2.7%. So average is 3.3%. What does that mean? So if there is a gathering of around 100 people, there will be at least 3 people who are having a thalassemia rate. So depending upon the state, the various regions, the carrier rate could be different from 3 to 17%. The highest is found in the Gujarat region, where the carrier rate, depending upon which community you belong to, it can range from 3 to 17%. And when there is one thalassemic is born every hour in India. So pathophysiology of thalassemia. So we all know that the hemoglobin molecule is a tetramer, which is consisting of 4 polypeptide chains. So there are 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. And then each chain is having an iron containing molecule known as heme. So there are different types of hemoglobin in different stages of development. At the embryonic age, we are having a GOVA1, Portland, and GOVA2, depending upon what kind of a hemoglobin chain is available at that time. Then we have a fetal hemoglobin and then adult hemoglobin. So it depends. So all these changes in the hemoglobin occurs because of their affinity to the oxygen. Initially, there is a low affinity to the high affinity to the oxygen, and then as the person grows, there is a low affinity to the oxygen, so that they can deliver oxygen readily to the various tissues. And for that, this adult hemoglobin is very effective, which is made up of alpha and beta chains. While alpha A2, which is a minor quantity present in all individuals, is made of alpha and delta chains. And we use these quantities and their proportion in our blood to identify various hemoglobinopathies. So in beta thalassemia, we have reduced and absent beta globin chains, and there is an increase in the fetal hemoglobin, and there is a decrease in the adult hemoglobin. So as you can see in this diagram, so in the erythroblast, there is mutations which happen for the chromosome 11, which is present, beta thal genes are present on the chromosome 11, and alpha thal genes are present in the chromosome 16. And what happens in the beta thal, the beta chains are not formed properly, and because of that, there is an excess alpha chains, which causes the denaturation, and because of that, there is an unstable RBC is formed, which leads to the either hemolysis in the extramedullary, or there could be apoptosis of those cells intramedullary, which is known as ineffective erythropoiesis. And in case of alpha thalassemia, there will be excess beta chains are there, which is known as HBH disease, and again that lead to ineffective erythropoiesis. So, so adult hemoglobin, as we know, it has alpha and beta chains, and once there is a decrease in any of the chain, this lead to abnormal hemoglobin formation or and lead to excessive destruction of the RBCs. So the various organs have different effect. One is that if there is a ineffective erythropoiesis, the need of the forming more erythroblast or more normal RBCs increases in the bone marrow, and because of that, we need iron, and because of that, there is an increased absorption from the gut. But since there is an ineffective erythropoiesis, this iron is not getting utilized properly, and it gets stored in the various organs, especially in the liver, heart, and other endocrine organs. Other abnormal thing which happened with the abnormal hemoglobin is that we have anemia, because our hemoglobin is not up to the mark, and it gets manifested as anemia. And because of this, there is a tissue hypoxia, and there is a marrow expansion, and skeletal deformities start forming. That's why we see in the thalassemia patients hemolytic phases. So any patient who are having a chronic hemolytic anemia, they can develop these hemolytic phases in which there is an expansion of the various marrow spaces, including the skull bones and maxillary bones, and which gives a typical picture, and it happens because of this marrow expansion. And then we have extravascular hemolysis also, and because of that, there are aggregates which gets deposited in the spleen, and then we have a extramedullary hematopoiesis also, and because of that, we are having a hepatosplenomegaly as well. So, so we can classify the thalassemias into alpha and beta thalassemias depending upon which chain is affected. So, it is very important when the two individuals get married to know their carrier state, because if only one mother or either father or mother is affected, then it is almost negligible chance to have a thalassemia major child. But if there is if both the individuals are having a carrier state, then there is a almost 25% chances there that the child with thalassemia major is born. So what is the clinical presentation? So major clinical features are there that they mostly present at the age of 4 to 6 months. They present with anemia. Mostly sometimes they present with the congestive cardiac failure also because of the severe anemia. They have abdominal distension because of the hepatosplenomegaly. Hemolytic phases we see in the later phases, later ages, especially more in the thalassemia intermedia, where the diagnosis of the disease is not made until the patient presents with a severe anemia at a later age. And there could be a jaundice also and poor weight gain in the patient. So as I said, they present between 6 to 12 months of the age. They have pallor, listlessness, poor feeding, and growth is there. Congestive cardiac failure may be present, and many of the patients they present with this problem. There is a sudden drop in hemoglobin, which may accompany any acute infection. And examination does reveal pallor with hepatosplenomegaly, and there is a characteristic phases with frontal and maxillary prominence, which are seen in the older child. Then in the thalassemia major, we have cumulative blood transfusions, which leads to transfusional iron overload. We have high ferritin levels, and because of that, there is a hyperpigmentation of the skin, and their skin is very, very dark. Then iron overload is seen in the organs, leading to heart failure, arrhythmias, and then we have endocrine problems, which we'll discuss in detail later. So once a patient who is coming with a pallor and a hepatosplenomegaly, how to investigate? Foremost is the CBC. So any patient who is having a low hemoglobin, we should look at the blood indices also. We should look at the MCV, MCH, and MCSC. So any patient who is having a microcytic, which is like a MCV lower than B75 is a microcytic anemia, and hypochromic is MCH. If any MCH is less than 25, then it is a hypochromic anemia. So we look at the microcytic hypochromic anemia, and then we need to differentiate it from the other macrocytic anemia. Another important differential diagnosis is iron deficiency anemia. So how to differentiate between the two? So this is the blood count picture. So looking at the peripheral smear is very, very important in diagnosing these disorders. You will just clinch the diagnosis without doing any specific or special test, but just looking at the picture. So if you see in the normal, in the smear, there is a, this is a normocytic and normochromic RBCs are there. While if you see in the thalassemia patients, you can see a very thin, rind out and lot of pallor over there in the cells, and these are hypochromic, microcytic hypochromic anemia. So, so in the blood picture, we need to look for the type of RBCs. We need to look at the target cells. We need to look at the nucleated RBCs and polychromasia. So these are the common findings which we see in thalassemia patients. So this is the picture, another picture, sorry. So in this, if you can see, there is a above picture is of iron deficiency anemia, and the below picture is of the thalassemia patient. So in thalassemia patients, we can see the target cells. If you see carefully, there are cells with the peripheral rim, and then there is a dot in the between. So this is a very typical of thalassemia patients. We do see target cells sometimes in iron deficiency anemia, but not in such huge number. So if you're seeing so much of target cells, mostly the patients are having a thalassemia disorder. And so in the thalassemia and iron deficiency anemia, both are having a microcytic, that is their MCV is low. Then RDW in iron deficiency is quite high because they are having a different types of shapes of the cells, so which is known as anisocytosis, in which the cells can be pencil shaped, they can be round, they could be different shape. While in beta thalassemia, most of the cell shapes is almost same. So their RDW, red cell distribution width, is not that very high. Then in iron deficiency, serum ferritin is always low because we know this is an iron deficiency. While in beta thalassemia, because of the abnormal ineffective erythropoiesis, there is an increased iron absorption in the body, and the ferritin levels are normal to high. Another important index which can help us in differentiating between iron deficiency and beta thalassemia is the Menzer index. What is Menzer index? When we take the MCV divided by red blood cell count, if it is more than 30, then it is a iron deficiency anemia, and if it is less than 30, then that is a beta thalassemia. So any patient who is having a microcytic hypochromic anemia with high RBC count. So mostly if the patient is having an anemia like hemoglobin around 6, 7 or 8, but if RBC count is around between the range of 4 or 5, mostly they have a Menzer index less than 13, and then definitely HPLC of these patients should be done to rule out thalassemia for these patients. So any patient who is presenting with anemia but RBC count in the range of 4 or 5, then they should be looked for a thalassemia disorder. And HB electrophoresis, it answers our problem. And if the patient is having a high HbF level, then definitely the patient, we are dealing with the thalassemia problem. So we confirm the diagnosis with the HPLC. HP electrophoresis is also used, and nowadays every center is having a HPLC machine, most of the centers, and it is readily available, and it is not a very costly test, and it gives us result and in a very short time. So it is a very useful and easily available test, and not very costly. HB electrophoresis can be used, was previously used, but now it is not commonly available in many of the centers. Still in some of the specialized centers, it is used to, especially to differentiate those disorders which are having a which are difficult and which are having some similar peaks in the HPLC. So different, to further differentiate in some of the disorders, we use HB electrophoresis also. So how to diagnose thalassemia trait? One is that patient is having a mild anemia. Hemoglobin is mostly in the range of 8 or 9, not never lower than that. And patient is definitely having a decrease in MCV. And if we do HPLC, then they have a HPA2. That is, since their beta chains are affected, so they have an increase in their delta chains. So HPA2 is slightly on the higher side, more than 3 and more than 3.5%. So this helps in diagnosing a thalassemia trait. So this is the graph which we see in thalassemia minor. If you see, adult hemoglobin is around 95 and HbA2 is around 4.7. So while if the patient is having a thalassemia major, then the HbA levels are very low. Sometimes we see 0, and then the HbF levels increases, and mostly they are between the range of 80 to 95%. And this is how we diagnose thalassemia major. While in thalassemia minor, HbA levels are within the normal range and HbA2 levels are higher. So normal values in HB electrophoresis is HbA adult levels are between 95 to 98%. HbA2 is 2 to 3%. HbF is 0.8 to 2%. And HbF in the newborn is in the range of 50 to 80%. So that's why thalassemia disorders are very difficult to diagnose through HPLC in newborns, because HbF levels, because of the fetal hemoglobin, is already very high, and it doesn't help us in diagnosing this patient. This is the chart which helps in telling us the various percentages of hemoglobin in the first year of life, and comparing this with this chart, the various levels which are found at HPLC, we can tell whether the HbF levels are normal or abnormal for the age. So if it is on the higher side, then further investigations would be required. So any other investigations which are required for the initial diagnosis of thalassemia? It is very important to do a HPLC test of the parents also, and to confirm that they are the traits. And the next step is to identify the mutation, because that will help us in the antenatal diagnosis. So if the patient is having a diagnosed with thalassemia major, try to refer that patient to do a mutation analysis also, so that in the future pregnancies, this mutation can be detected as antenatally, and if present, then patient mothers can be advised for MTP. So errors in requesting HB electrophoresis. We should not request HB electrophoresis if the age is less than 4 months and following a blood transfusion. So if the patient has taken a recent blood transfusion, then the HbA levels will come as normal, because it has been taken from the normal individual. So there should be a gap of at least 3 to 4 weeks before sending the patient from the blood transfusion, before sending the sample for HPLC. So how the pediatrician can help in diagnosing and prevention of thalassemia? Always try to reinforce and encourage at every visit the family screening, and help, and always tell the parents or the family to do an antenatal diagnosis for the future pregnancies. So there are certain genetic modifiers in thalassemia, which is actually makes thalassemia disorders quite interesting, because even if the patient is having a similar kind of a mutation, their the penetration of the gene may be different and their presentation may be different. So depending upon how much is the beta globin genotype, which is it can affect the severity of the beta thalassemia. Depending upon if the patient is having alpha thalassemia associated with beta thalassemia, then it reduces the chain imbalance, and patient may have not so much ineffective erythropoiesis, and patient may not require so much of blood transfusion, even if he is having a homozygous beta thalassemia. And similarly with the other abnormalities which are present, depending upon the gene abnormalities, the blood transfusion requirements may be different in similar kind of a genetic disorder. Another important question is should we prescribe iron to improve the hemoglobin in thalassemia minor? Definitely we should go ahead, because there is a concomitant iron deficiency which is commonly seen in India, and it should be given for 3 to 6 months, and iron studies should be done ideally but not mandatory. And another important thing is that because of the iron deficiency, sometimes HbA2 levels could be on the lower side, and we are not able to identify the thalassemia minors properly. And after correcting their iron deficiency, HPLC should be repeated to check the HbA2 levels, and if they are coming in the range of thalassemia minor, then they should be diagnosed as carriers. So what is thalassemia intermedia? It is less severe than thalassemia major, and it causes reduced and occasional requirement of blood is there. So many people, they ask whether the child is having thalassemia major or intermedia, how to differentiate between the two. So mostly thalassemia major, they present at the age less than 2 years, while thalassemia intermedia is mostly presented more than 2 years. Hemoglobin levels is between the range of 6 to 7, and while in the thalassemia intermedia, it is between the range of 8 to 10. And liver and spleen enlargement is seen in both, and in thalassemia intermedia, it can be moderate to severe, while in major, if they are not undergone blood transfusion, it can be severe. Hemoglobin HbF levels are more than 50%, and in thalassemia intermedia between 10 to 50, and HbA2 levels are less than 4, while in intermedia it is more than 4. While in genetic issues, the parents both are carriers of HbA, carriers of beta thalassemia, and other will be having a high HbF beta thalassemia and borderline HbA2, and they are maybe typical or atypical carriers. So important thing about the thalassemia intermedia patients is that whether we should give them the advice regarding the blood transfusion and how frequently the blood transfusion should be given to these patients. See, many of these patients, they respond very nicely to hydroxyurea. And second is that blood transfusion to be offered to those thalassemia intermediate patients who are having a huge hepatosplenomegaly and those who are having a growth failure. So for those patients, definitely a thalassemia intermediate, for those thalassemia intermediate, blood transfusion should be offered. So this is a chart which tells us depending upon the blood requirement, where the various disorders stay. So now management of these patients, how to manage these patients. So we have understood the pathophysiology of the thalassemia, and we have understood the clinical presentation. We know there are alpha and beta genes depending upon what kind of a genetic disorder is there, and the genotype differences are there. Phenotypically, the presentation would be there. And then depending upon their presentation, the requirements of each child or the disorder would be different. So how to manage them? So management of thalassemia is always a multidisciplinary. We require pediatrician, we require a hematologist, we require endocrinologist, transfusion medicine person, gastroenterologist, cardiologist, gynecologist, fertility issues, psychologist, and all those people are required. So now, so managing a thalassemia is a huge responsibility, and so not just giving blood transfusions to these patients, we have to actually monitor them very regularly so that they can have a normal growth and normal life as much as possible. So regarding the blood transfusion guidelines, how to decide when to start a transfusion. So at the time of diagnosis, if the patient is having hemoglobin less than 7 at 2 occasions more than 2 weeks apart, then blood transfusion has to be started. But nowadays, if the patient is already diagnosed with thalassemia major, we don't wait for so much for that. Mostly we start blood transfusion, especially if the patient is in a cardiac failure. And if the patient, those who even are having a hemoglobin more than 7, but they are having a poor growth and they are having a hemolytic phases, then also we advise them to go for a blood transfusion regularly. So what are the two most important rules in the treatment of thalassemia major? One is that to maintain the pre-transfusion hemoglobin levels more than 9 and maintain the ferritin level less than 1000. So we all know that the blood transfusions are necessary even for these patients to maintain their life. But keeping the hemoglobin level less than 8 is also a problem, and keeping a hemoglobin less than more than 11 is also a problem. Less than 7, less than 8, actually less than 7 or less than 9 actually causes growth failure in these patients, and it can be counterproductive. And those who are having a hypertransfusion leads to an increase in ferritin levels. So we need to do a chelation of these patients also properly. So maintaining a good hemoglobin and even doing a good chelation is very, very important in the management of thalassemia major patients. So what happens if the blood is transfused irregularly to a child with thalassemia major? So one is that they have long-standing anemia. Because of that, there is a chronic hypoxia which happens to the bones, leading to a poor growth, bone changes. And because of that, there is an extramedullary hematopoiesis also, which leads to an increase in liver and spleen. And if the spleen size increases, then the sequestration of the RBCs happens in the spleen also. And this leads to hypersplenism. And because of that, patient can have further cytopenias. So anything special about the type of blood that needs to be given? Try to give the packed cells. So packed cells is the best. Don't give whole blood to these patients. Febrile reactions are common because of the proteins which are present in the blood, and maybe because of the white cell aluminization. And that's why we always advise these patients to have a leukodepleted blood. We use leukocyte filters at the bedside, or these are leukodepleted at the time of storage. This methodology increases the cost of the blood, but these in the long term they are very useful because these prevent the aluminization. And once the aluminization happens, the requirement of the blood also increases in these patients. So careful. Selection of the blood should be done, and it also should be done in the consultation with the hematologist, because these patients require blood transfusions for a long time, and a lot of complications happen, especially in the later life of these patients. So mostly we transfuse these patients at the rate of around 15 to 20 ml per kg, 2 to 5 weekly, depending upon their pre-transfusion hemoglobins. And we try to keep their hemoglobin, pre-transfusion hemoglobins between 8 to 9. Actually, between 9 to 10 is ideal, but we try to keep it at least between 8 to 9. And older children, because of their increase in the weight and all requirements and aluminization, their demand for the blood transfusion increases. And mostly we transfuse between 2 to 3 hours. Don't try to hang the blood more than 3 hours, and we don't need to warm the blood. The warming of the blood is only required when there is a massive transfusion requirement is there, and we don't give any diuretic during the blood transfusions. Fresh versus old blood, preferably they should be stored for at least less than 2 weeks. So not very old blood is preferred for these patients. So blood transfusion from close relatives should be encouraged. As we know that finding donors for these patients is very difficult, but we don't encourage the relatives' blood because they can have a aluminization. Another thing is they can have a graft versus transfusion related graft versus host disease also. So these patients should not be given blood from their close relatives. So they have frequent reactions. So mostly sometimes we give paracetamol before the transfusion, and we use leukocyte filters. Those who develop aluminization, then match blood for C, E, and KEL antigens is done. And those who are having a frequent febrile non-hemolytic reaction, red blood cells are done, saline washing is done. But this is, we try to avoid in many of the patients because saline washing decreases the RBC's lifespan, and these patients then require more frequent blood transfusions. So as we know, blood transfusion is a necessary evil for these patients. Then iron chelation. So we know we give blood, iron goes into the body, and there is no mechanism in the body to remove the excessive iron. And this iron gets deposited in the various organs, lead to their organ failure. So we can develop cardiomyopathy, we can develop liver cirrhosis. Growth failure happens because of the iron deposition in the various endocrine organs, including pituitary, and we can also develop endocrinopathies. So if blood is regularly transfused, but iron chelation is not given, then what will happen? Mostly the death by 20 to 25 years of age happens because of the excess iron in the heart and liver. So definitely iron chelation is very, very important. And it is very useful to manage the adverse effect of blood transfusion. So when to start the iron chelation is another important. Before the Defersirox, we used to start the iron chelation at the age of 2 years if the patient is having more than 10 blood transfusion or serum ferritin more than 1000. But nowadays we used only one parameter, that is if the ferritin level is more than 1000, we start the iron chelation in these patients, even if they are less than 1 year of age. So we have Desferal, which is a subcutaneous, and IV. It is quite effective. But it is required for 8 to 12 hours of day, and many of the patients then don't require it because it hampers their activity also. But it is very useful to remove the iron from the heart and liver. Then we have Deferpiron, Calfer tablets. Again, it is very useful to remove the iron load from the heart. It is required 3 times a day, and it can be given up to the dose of 75 to 100 milligram per kg. Most important side effect is cytopenias and arthropathy in these patients. Defersirox is now commonly used. Many of the patients, they are taking it very regularly, and it is easy to take. One is that it is oral. Second, it is once a day, and it can be increased up to 30 to 40 milligram per kg. It is quite effective. Some of the side effects which we see is increased liver enzymes and creatinine, but proper monitoring helps in decreasing these side effects. And now various generics are available, which has brought down the cost of this drug. So now we are using combination therapies also for these patients. So those patients who are having a high iron overload, we use sometimes a combination, sometimes Desferal, sometimes Calfer and Defersirox occasionally, but Desferal and Defersirox is now being commonly used for these patients. So how frequently we need to do the iron chelation monitoring? We need to do the serum ferritin levels every 4 to 6 months, but we know that serum ferritin levels can change with the patient's infection, and it is a reactive protein. So most gold standard is to do the iron, checking the iron levels in the body is T2 MRI. So it is now recommended. So any child who is more than 7 years of age should have a T2 MRI monitoring regularly to know the iron overload in various organs. So if the patient is having a iron if the patient presents with a fever for 5 days, investigate and treat as normal child. If the patient is on Calfer, exclude neutropenia. If the patient is having a splenectomy, it can be encapsulated organisms, and they need to treat vigorously, and always think of malaria in these patients. So management of thalassemia intermedia is we give folic acids, we give hydroxyurea for these patients, and if the patient develops hypersplenism, then splenectomy can be offered to these patients. So now coming to the complications in these patients, the patients, they can, as we know, they can have iron overload, they have abnormal hematopoiesis, they have chronic diseases, and they have organ dysfunction. So these patients, they develop a lot of bone disorders, osteoporosis, they have endocrine dysfunction leading to hypogonadism, growth failure, hypothyroidism. They have cardiomyopathy, they have various infectious complications, and splenomegaly is there, and hepatic dysfunction is there. So Short stature and retarded growth almost invariably occurs in thalassemia major patients, and mainly it is because of the chronic hypoxia and because of the anemia, persistent anemia in this patient. Another reason for this is the endocrinological problems also. So how to maintain the growth of these patients? Proper blood transfusions to maintain the pre-transfusion hemoglobin level more than 9 gram per deciliter is very important. Proper chelation to attain the serum ferritin level less than 100 nanogram per ml again is very, very important. Then use of alternative iron chelators if the serum ferritin is not coming down with one chelator. Correction of the nutrition deficiencies, supplementation of zinc and sulfate, correction of hypersplenism, and proper diagnosis and management of growth delay and growth hormone treatment is very important in these patients. So close contact with the endocrinologist and regular referral to endocrinologist is very, very important for these patients. And we should also look for pubertal delay, and referral to endocrinologist is an important component in managing the thalassemia patients. So annual checking of the bone marrow density with DEXA scans is very important. We regularly give calcium to these patients and along with vitamin D. Then early diagnosis and treatment of diabetes mellitus is very, very important. Adequate iron chelation and sufficient blood transfusion is the crux of matter. So those patients who are having a delayed and arrested puberty, finding a reason is very important. They mostly have hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, and then oral administration of various drugs which are endocrinological, like ethyl estrogens for the girls, and for the males giving the testosterone may help in improving their growth. Then diagnosis of hypothyroidism again is an important component in their management. They can have a clinical and subclinical hypothyroidism, and regular follow-up of free T4 and TSH levels is very, very important. Those who are having a normal TSH and but high T4 levels, again, they can have a subclinical, and they're having a more regular follow-up is very, very important. So these patients should be offered thyroid thyroxine whenever it is required. So treatment is patient with overt hypothyroidism should be given L-thyroxine. Then again, diabetes mellitus, they over the age with the pancreas, with the iron deposition in the pancreas, they develop a lot of they can develop this glucose intolerance, and they have diabetes mellitus. And regular, especially in the adolescent age and young adults, glucose tolerance test should be done to make a diagnosis of a diabetes mellitus. So the important component of any diabetes management is strict diabetic diet. Regular physical activity should be encouraged, and oral hypoglycemic drugs along with insulin can be offered to these patients. So those patients who develop hypersplenism and those who require frequent blood transfusions, splenectomy can be offered. And like in the previous, like I would say 5 to 10 years back, splenectomy in older patients of thalassemia was quite common. And as we know, with the splenectomy, the risk of OPSI increases more than 50 times than the general population, and they need to be vaccinated properly. So vaccination again is a very important component of management of thalassemia patients, and they should be vaccinated against encapsulated organisms, hepatitis B, and other general vaccination also should be given to these patients. And as we know, we need to manage these patients as splenectomized patients, and whatever the guidelines are there, we need to give them penicillin drug for the life once they have undergone splenectomy. So penicillin prophylaxis is required for these patients. So these are the indications for the splenectomy. The most important indication is definitely hypertransfusion needs and development of cytopenias. So annual transfusion volume used to flag an increase in the blood requirement. Alloimmunization is there. Cytopenias development and symptomatic splenomegaly. These are some of the indications of splenectomy. sorry. Coming to the liver disease, we know that liver is the major target organ in thalassemia, which gets damaged, and there is because of the iron overload and also because of the viral infections, hepatitis B and hepatitis C virus. Now, because of the hepatitis B vaccination, we don't see hepatitis B infection so commonly, but hepatitis C virus is commonly seen in these thalassemia patients. And early diagnosis and early viral treatment is very, very important for these patients, especially to prevent the chronic liver disease, liver cirrhosis, and ultimately they have a high risk of developing a hepatocellular carcinoma also. So this is just highlighting how the various how the hepatic iron overload happens in thalassemia. We know that each unit of blood has 200 to 250 milligram of iron, and normally body loses around 1 to 2 milligrams. So with every transfusion there is a huge iron overload which goes into the body, and it gets it affects both the spleen and the liver, and in the liver it affects the hepatic macrophages known as cells. So how to check these problems? One is that we do plasmin transferrin levels also. Those who are having the transferrin levels which saturation reaching up to 100%, definitely we know that they are having a non-bound labile iron, which is more commonly present in which is more present in the body, and this is quite dangerous iron, which is a free iron, and it damages the organs quite a lot. So doing a good iron chelation is a very important component to prevent the toxic effects of the iron overload in these patients. So this is just a diagrammatic representation of what actually happens in the with the iron deposition. So we do serum ferritin levels, we do T2 MRI. T2 MRI is a very, very useful and easy modality to understand the iron overload in the liver. And then if available, we use labile plasma iron levels and non-transferrin NT-PI levels also. But these are not easily available, not routinely assessed in the patients. Okay, so this is another interesting diagram. So like the patients under A are mostly seen in the thalassemia intermediate. This kind of iron deposition we see in thalassemia intermediate patients, while macrophagic Kupffer cell cirrhosis we mostly see in the thalassemia major patients. So this is the difference in the iron overload in two different kinds of thalassemia presentations. So we used Defixirox, Defipiran, and Desferoxamine in different, depending upon the patient age and need. And these all three drugs are quite useful in removing the iron from the body. But regular chelation is very, very important. And the compliance, checking the compliance of these chelators is again very, very important. So another important aspect is that we know that thalassemia is a disorder which has a lot of complications while managing the disorder itself. So blood transfusion has its own problems, iron chelation has its iron overload has its own problem. So what is the curative therapy in these patients? So curative therapy is bone marrow transplant, and it is having more than 90% of success. We can do, so the transplant which we do in these patients is a mass sibling transplant. We try to avoid other types of transplant in these patients because they have their own complication. So if there is a mass sibling of a thalassemia patients, we always offer a transplant in these patients. And then in the bone marrow transplant, though blood transfusion and chelation considered as a not very expensive, but in the long term it is much more expensive than the bone marrow transplant. One bone marrow transplant is a one-time expense, and it is a curative therapy for these patients. And I would say it should be counseled and offered to all the patients. And if the sibling is available, the transplant should be done before the age of 10 years when the iron overload has not happened so much in the patient and organ dysfunction is not there. Then if the patient family is having a thalassemia, mother is pregnant, what advice should be given? The patient should be done for antenatal diagnosis, and we can give advice of cord blood storage, but nowadays we don't tell them. If the sibling is actually matched and other sibling is affected, then we try to take up bone marrow cells from the matched sibling itself rather than the cord blood. So if the parents do ask whether they can have a normal, whether the child will have a normal life or not. So if the same blood transfusion is given every 3 to 4 weeks and they are having a pre-transfusion level of more than 9 and serum ferritin is less than 1000, then nearly normal life can be there. We have seen, I have seen the eldest thalassemia patient of the age of 30 years, 38 years so far. So uh, beyond that, definitely they develop a lot of complications. So we have gene therapy also for the treatment of these patients. So we can use. So take home points is check and encourage compliance, iron chelation, folic acid and calcium D3 should be given to these patients. Avoid interrupting iron chelation for minor illnesses for these patients, and reinforce family screening, antenatal diagnosis and bone marrow transplant should be offered to these patients. Psychological support should be given to these patients, and dietary restrictions should be prevented, because with the diet not much iron can be taken, and we should not prevent their normal activity and normal life by doing some restrictions. So antenatal diagnosis definitely is important, and it should be offered to the family who is having a thalassemia major patient. Thank you. So that's all I had to say. Any questions regarding